Dear students, in this lecture we will discuss the war as a foreign policy instrument. It will be discussed under Chapter 8 in terms of foreign policy analysis. Now, the objectives of this chapter are simple. First, to grasp the meaning and role of war and conflict as a foreign policy tool. And second, identify various types of war and conflict. And let's begin with defining the concept of war. Now, war can be defined as the use of force by groups with the aim of achieving their objectives. The 19th century German general and theorist Karl von Clausewitz defines war as not merely a political act, but also a political instrument, a continuation of political relations, a carrying out of the same by other means. In this context, war might be defined as the systemic violence imposed by political entities in order to achieve their political goals. Now, a more broader, inclusive definition of war we should mention are some attempts that try to synthesize and combine the legal, sociological, military, and psychological views of war. They are more complex in their approaching to war. Now, there are many types of war and conflict, and war can be classified according to the size of the group that uses force, the type of means which are used, or the extent of violence involved in the war, their terrain, intensity as absolute or limited war. Now, according to the types of the weapons used, conventional or unconventional weapons. Another classification can be based on the tactics used in the war as unconventional warfare or conventional warfare. And the composition of the parties is another determining category. It can be an international war, a civil war, a complex war, or a dyadic war. And the motives of the parties can also change the type of conflict. It can be a religious war, or an ethnic war. And we can also divide between the hot and cold wars. Now, I will try to define each type of war and conflict very briefly. Now, first, let's begin from the absolute and limited wars. Absolute war is a type of warfare which is unrestricted in terms of the weapons used. There is no restrictions for the weapons used in this war, no limitations for the territory involved, and no limitations for the objectives pursued and the resources that are allocated. No limitations. An absolute war means that a war on which a state allocates its all resources and directed its all attention to it and have no restrictions. A limited war, on the other hand, is any war limited in space and involved restraints by belligerents is defined as a limited war. Another categorization is conventional war, and unconventional warfare. Conventional wars are the ones waged through the use of traditional, conventional means, weapons. Unconventional warfare, on the other hand, uses unconventional weapons, non-traditional ones, along with conventional ones, targets the civilian population as well as the armed forces, and specializes in conventional tactics. There is also regular and guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare is war without front lines. There is no front line for guerrilla. Guerrilla fighters are everywhere. The purpose is not to directly confront an enemy army, but rather to harass and punish it so as to gradually limit its operation and effectively liberate territory from its control. However, on the other hand, a regular warfare is what we understand from war and conflict. Civil and international wars are also important in their difference. International war is the conventional definition of war taking place between sovereign states. Civil war, on the other hand, is a war between organized groups within the same country, fighting with the aim of taking control of the country or a region, achieving independence for a region, or changing government policies. Then a civil war is about conflicting groups within the same country. Asymmetric warfare and conventional warfare is another categorization. And asymmetric warfare is one of unconventional warfare. It is when the military capabilities of belligerents are not simply unequal, but they are so significantly different that they cannot make the same sort of attacks on each other. And the Cold War and Hot War. Cold War refers to intensive ideological and political struggles which do not reach the level of open armed warfare. The means of Cold Wars are political and economic activities, propaganda, espionage, and proxy wars. Dyadic war and complex war is another category to be defined. Now, complex wars are wars with more than 3 participants. Dyadic wars, on the other hand, are wars between 2 states. Complex wars are longer and more uncertain than the dyadic wars. Now, it can be discussed whether in our contemporary time there are dyadic wars remaining. It is not possible to have dyadic wars under current international circumstances, I think. When it comes to religious, ethnic, and ideological wars, we can first define ethnic conflicts as conflicts with which the objectives of at least one party are defined in our ethnic terms, and the conflict and possible solutions are perceived along ethnic lines. Now, at least one party of the conflict should be defined in ethnic terms, should be defined itself in ethnic terms at least, and the conflict and possible solutions are perceived along ethnic lines. Religious wars are similar. They are conflicts primarily caused or justified by differences in religion. And ideological wars serve as expressions of underlying differences between conflicting parties. Now, there are many categorizations made to explain the causes of war. The most widely used is the categorization about the causes of war, which we see now on the slide. Now we can then categorize the causes of war as immediate causes and underlying causes, permissive causes and efficient causes, and last, necessary causes and sufficient causes. Immediate causes can be defined as causes that trigger the outbreak of war, while underlying causes are to be found in the structural level. When we think of the First World War, we can say that the assassination of Ferdinand was the immediate cause, but the underlying cause of the First World War lied in the imperialism and colonization and the motivation of Germany to catch other big powers in their struggle on colonization, imperialism. Now, permissive causes and efficient causes. Efficient causes are related to particular circumstances, while permissive causes do not promote war actively, but they allow it to occur. Now, if two nations hate each other and one of them threatened the other one, there is a situation to struggle on it. But this is an efficient cause. If you hate the other one, if you threat the other one, there is a efficient cause. But a permissive cause is more structural. This means that because the structure of the international system is anarchic, wars are inevitable. This means the anarchic structure of the international system is a permissive cause of war. Necessary causes and sufficient causes. A sufficient cause is a condition that, if it is present, it guarantees the occurrence of war, while necessary cause is a condition that must exist if war is to occur. Without that condition, war cannot break out. Now, a sufficient cause can be two nations hate each other. This is sufficient, but not necessarily. But having weapons is a necessary cause. If you have not weapons, you cannot go to war. Now, war is not a legal instrument of foreign policy in the contemporary international system. Now, in this lecture or under this chapter, we have discussed war as a tool, a means of foreign policy. However, we have to bear in our minds that in our contemporary international system, war is not a legal tool of international relations. It is outlawed by the United Nations Charter. Now, the first attempt to restrict war was the establishment of the League of Nations. Now, actually, the League of Nations did not outlaw war as a means, but tried to avoid the break of war, including some mechanisms in international negotiation processes. In 1928, U.S. Foreign Minister Robert Kellogg and French Foreign Minister Aristide Bryant signed an agreement which is called the Bryant-Kellogg Pact and invited all other states of the international system to sign this agreement. It is named as the Bryant-Kellogg Pact, and it is the first official attempt to outlaw war in international relations. However, as we already know, the Bryant-Kellogg Pact, or the attempts of the League of Nations, could not stop the breaking of the Second World War. However, after the Second World War, with the establishment of the United Nations, war is outlawed officially as a tool of international relations or as a tool of foreign policy. Now, according to the United Nations charters, all members shall refrain in the international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purpose of the United Nations. This means that all states signed the United Nations Charter, accepted that war is an illegal tool of foreign policy. Thank you for listening and watching this lecture.